Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and today I want to talk about Star Trek Discovery, Picard, and Lower Decks, and to ask the question which of them is better, and also is Discovery getting better from season to season. In my opinion, Star Trek Picard was the absolute worst one of the bunch, and the most disappointing because when it was first announced, I thought they were finally bringing back the real Star Trek, and then was greatly disappointed by that show, which I think is even worse than Star Trek Discovery, because at least Discovery looks expensive, at least the special effects are good in a lot of places, and yet Picard felt so cheap even in that department. So it was completely bad in almost every way. Even the acting, even Patrick Stewart, who I always loved, was kind of phoning it in this show, and so I didn't like most of it. I did think one episode was good, the one when he met Riker. That's the only episode I actually enjoyed, and there were some good scenes like the one with Data in the end, even though it had a bunch of problems, but overall I think it was kind of good. And also the first episode was okay, it showed some promise, some potential, but most of the show was terrible. Most of the characters were terrible, the sets were terrible, the special effects were cheap. So it was the worst Star Trek show probably of all of them, maybe even worse than the animated show, the original animated show. And speaking of animated shows, I actually think Lower Decks is relatively good, relatively to the new Star Trek shows. Of course, I cannot really put it against re-looking shows because it's just a cartoon, but if I compare it with the original animated show, this one is much better, much more entertaining. It's a comedy, it's a self-parody, and it actually pays attention to all the details, which was so refreshing after Discovery, which always messed up the continuity, didn't give any respect to the old canon or how everything should look and all of that. So Lower Decks actually did all of those things correctly. Even though it's a cartoon, it actually looked like it should look like. And it was set in the time period where the Star Trek shows, in my opinion, should have continued from, which is, after Voyager and Deep Space Nine, and in that time period, and so everything looked like it should, and it also had some cameos of Riker on the Titan and all of that. And it was actually funny in a lot of places, in my opinion. Some people disagree, but for my personal taste, it was actually entertaining. And of course, I would have preferred an actual Star Trek show with real actors and real sets and realistic looking and with actual serious stories with just the occasional comedy. So of course I would have preferred that, but still this one I thought was kind of a nice parody, which was entertaining for me, and everything looked the way it should have, and so it was so refreshing after Discovery, because one of the things that pissed me off most in Discovery was how they were reimagining everything and just reinventing everything while pretending to be a prequel set in the same continuity as the other shows, and yet not paying attention to the details, and even internally having so many contradictions, so many illogical things even inside of the show. And so Discovery, I think, was worse than Lower Decks, even though it is better than Picard, because at least it had some decent special effects once in a while, it had some nice action scenes and stuff, and so Picard didn't even have that. So that's why I think I would put Discovery above Picard, but below Lower Decks. Now, as for the actual seasons of Discovery, I do think the show gets slightly better from season to season, because the first season I think was almost completely terrible. The only thing I actually liked in it was Captain Lorca, who turned out to be a villain and was made into one-dimensional evil character and killed off, which was extremely disappointing. But before that, I actually thought they were building up a complex character who might end up as the villain in the end, but he was interesting and he was competent, he was clever. So that's the only thing I actually liked in the first season, and visually it was the worst season because everything was so dark and blue and the camera was shaking and rotating and spinning around and you can't tell what's going on in space, everything is blurry and all of that, so I really hated it even visually. Overall it was a pretty bad season, probably the worst one, and season 2 in my opinion was a big improvement. Visually everything became brighter, they started adding some comedy, some light into it, and Captain Pike also joined the crew for that season, and I thought he was actually good, except some places I didn't like, but overall I liked Captain Pike. He actually felt like a Star Trek captain and a Star Trek character. He actually felt like Starfleet material, and the actor was great, and that even makes me slightly optimistic about the Pike show, which at least the lead role will be good. At least the main actor and the main character is good, and if they write him well, it might be great. And one of the best scenes of the whole show is that scene when he sees his own future, being disfigured and in a wheelchair, and I thought that was a brilliant scene, and also it ties so well with the continuity. That's probably the only example from the whole show that made it worthwhile to be a prequel, because in everything else I always say this show should have been set in the future from the first place and not try to be a prequel and be tied with the other shows. But that one scene was the only example that actually made me think it's a good thing that it's a prequel and they can tie into it in a cool way. So that's the only example of that. And the season did have a lot of cool action scenes and great special effects, and the visual style was much better. A lot of the stories were kind of simplistic and kind of recycled from other movies, and you know, that Terminator storyline of an evil AI wanting to destroy everything, and some prophet time traveler thing tries to save it and all of that. And I did kind of like the convoluted time travel story. I even made a video where I was trying to draw everything, to explain everything, and they didn't pay enough attention to all the details. I think they did make a few mistakes and messed everything up, but I still kind of admire the ambition of it. I like how convoluted all of it was. And also the formula of the season was that each episode had its own little story, but also an overarching storyline across the whole season. So I think that's the best way to do a Star Trek show, to have individual stories and also a bigger story, but not as one long movie, which sometimes makes it feel boring and dragged, and it leaves you unsatisfied. That's how season 1 was, that it all felt like one long movie, and it's never finishes any of the storylines, and you have to keep waiting for the next one, and it's really annoying. And even if you watch it all in one go, it will still be boring. It's like one long boring movie. And at least season 2 had its individual stories, which did have its own conclusions, and so it was a much better formula in my opinion. And the character of Spock is kind of good and bad simultaneously, because on the one hand I don't like him being Spock. I don't think it ties well with the backstory of the OS. On the other hand, as just a character, just a Vulcan, I thought he was good. If he was a new character, he could have been great, because the actor was great, and even some of the way they wrote him was good, and so I wouldn't have minded him as a new character. I would have liked him, but the fact that they're trying to shoehorn all of the backstory from TOS kind of ruins the whole thing. And also, especially in the end of the season, when they kind of lazily started explaining away the continuity mistakes which they created by saying, you know, we have to classify everything for no reason, there was no logical reason to it, and then they decide to jump the ship to the far future to fix the very problem of the show being a prequel, which annoyed so many fans like me, who said that the show should be set in the future. And so that's probably why they jumped the ship to the future, to fix this problem. But they also had to explain away why no one knew about them, and so they classify everything for no reason. And you know, the spore drive is such an important piece of technology, everybody just forgot about it, and no one else in the whole galaxy ever invented it, so that's kind of stupid. They didn't really fix this problem with continuity, and they did have other ways to do it which they didn't do. And so I'm still annoyed by the season, especially the end of that season. And also it had that stupid stuff with Section 31, everybody knowing about Section 31, and the evil Empress from the Mirror Universe suddenly being welcomed into it, and Ash Tyler, who's a Klingon for some reason, is being trusted and put in Section 31. So all of that was so convoluted and so rushed and so illogical that it's still annoying to me. But at least the season did have some good moments and some good action scenes and special effects, and so it is watchable. I could have watched it without getting bored most of the time, unlike Picard, who really bored me so much that I barely was able to finish some of the episodes because they were so boring and so bad and so annoying. And so I think season 2 of Discovery was better than Picard and better than season 1. And as for season 3 of Star Trek Discovery, I definitely think it's better than the first season, but I'm not sure it's better than the second season. You know, it didn't have Pike, it didn't have the convoluted time travel story, which I kind of semi-liked in season 2. And the overall story in season 3 was less interesting in my opinion. Also, the conclusion really wasn't that satisfying to me. But it did have some individual episodes which I thought were good. The best episode in my opinion was the one with Adira going back to Trill and rediscovering her Trill memories. All of that I thought was well done, and I think it's probably the best episode of the entire show in my opinion. And even the first episode was kind of a ripoff of Star Wars plot-wise, but at least visually it was good. It was shot on location in Iceland, and we had some cool action scenes and all of that, so at least it was entertaining visually. And other episodes also had some cool moments, and character wise I think probably it might be the best season because it didn't have some of the annoying characters from the previous seasons, like Sarek and Amanda and Ash Tyler and L'Oreal. All of those characters are gone, thank God, and so I do think character-wise it's probably better, and they started developing some of the minor characters, and they introduced Book, who is an okay character in my opinion. I don't really hate anything about him, except his glowing forehead maybe, which was kind of silly. But other than that, I think he's fine, and the Admiral and some of the minor new characters were okay. And visually, I think it didn't feel as expensive as Season 2, it felt a little bit less ambitious. And the fact that we're in the far future should have meant they should have much more advanced technology, and yet what they showed us was not really that advanced, except a few things like, programmable matter, some of the way the ships operate, the detached nacelles, stuff like that. I thought was cool. I didn't mind those new ideas, even though I thought there should have been a lot more cool stuff in such a far future. But at least the show is finally in the far future, and so it's not as annoying continuity-wise as it was before, because it's no longer trying to shoehorn itself as a prequel, even though there was that one episode when she looks up what happened with Spock, and they play a clip of the old Spock of Leonard Nimoy, which was annoying. So they still do that a little bit, but overall they kind of stopped with that. So it became more like a sequel series and not a prequel series, which is a much better idea. And it's not as annoying continuity-wise, even though there's still a bunch of mistakes, and they kind of started to reimagine Star Trek as a new version of Star Trek, and so they're kind of retconning some things, they're explaining away some things, like, time travel is banned, warp drive is severely limited, and it's now like a form of currency to use the lithium crystals. I don't actually mind any of those ideas. I think they can work if they do something clever with it, so I don't mind the actual setup, most of Starfleet being wiped out, and so now they're kind of on the run, in the hiding. All of that is okay. I could have been totally fine with that, but the villains were really the weak spot of this season. I thought the villains were really pathetic and not interesting, and especially in the end of the season it was really disappointing that it didn't seem challenging at all. Like, Michael single-handedly saved the whole Federation in the end, and the rest of Starfleet was useless, and it's the same nonsense that they did with this character early on in the series, and so it seemed as if they are reinventing the character and making her more relatable at first in the season, but then in the end she became the same exact character as before. So definitely a lot of problems, and that's why I'm not even sure which season would I rank best. Is it season 3 or 2? I'm not even sure. In some ways season 2 was better and more interesting, but it did have more annoying things overall, I think, and so both of them had a lot of annoying stuff, but I think overall, if I look at everything together, I probably will give a slight edge to season 3. I do think it has less annoying things and slightly more interesting things overall, and I did like the optimistic ending, the fact that, they're kind of fixing the situation that at first I was annoyed by that they're kind of making it all a dystopian future and all of that. But because they kind of fixed it in the end, that makes me forgiving of that. And so I think overall season 3 is better than season 2, and both of them are much better than season 1, and the whole show is better than season 1 of Picard, which was even worse, was more annoying and more boring and more cheap looking. But I think Lower Decks, even though it's a cartoon, it's probably more entertaining than all of these seasons and all of these shows. And it actually feels more like a real Star Trek because it does pay attention to the details. Everything looks like it did in that era of TNG and Deep Space Nine and Voyager, and so that's why I personally enjoy the Lower Decks much more, even though it's a silly cartoon, but a lot of its jokes actually worked in my opinion. I'm kind of a fan of silly humor. I used to do a lot of edits, parody mashups of Star Trek and turning it into a silly comedy show with a lot of silly things, and so that fits my personal style of comedy, and that's why I personally enjoyed Lower Decks more than I did all these other shows. But that's all just my opinion. Let me know what you think and we can discuss it in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, please subscribe, click the notification bell to see updates of new videos, and I will see you all next time. Bye bye.